Blog Talk Radio.
Back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I was just sent some fascinating information by Nate, who is a student of the Billy Meyer case, very much so. And let me read this to you quickly. This has to do with the sixth and seventh senses. The fact is, in regard to the Feinstoffsinnlich, that not only are those human beings who can see subject to a day and night rhythm to which all body functions, even the pupils are adjusted, rather the blind are also, as are all blind creatures. So, from that it also follows that the blind, and especially the blind, perceive that which pertains to the Feinstoffsinnlich, and are therefore especially active in terms of the spiritual, fine, sensitive feeling. We talked about that before on the show, that spiritual, fine, sensitive feeling is what helps you perceive the radiating love of creation. It's a sense which comes from the Gemut naturally, and it's also related to being able to express real love. Naturally, they also perceive the material realm, yet their spiritual, fine, sensitive feeling capabilities are more pronounced than the capabilities of those who can see. And indeed, it is because they direct their energies into the inner eye, or put more precisely, into the pineal gland. Besides, also, with the blind, the retina is interwoven with special nerve cells through which signals are transmitted to the pineal gland. This simulates the production of the hormone melatonin, which steers the inner clock and so determines the life rhythm of the body. Well, thanks to Nate for that very profound information. I appreciate that very much. Edward Albert Meyer is a farmer from Switzerland. He lives in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmidruti. He's known by most of the world as Billy because of his fondness of Western movies. His real name is Edward, which means guardian of the treasure. And the treasure that he's guardian of is an ancient universal teaching called the teaching of the Spirit. The teaching of the Spirit can really be divided probably into many categories, but typically I outline 5 major categories, at least for myself. I'm sure there are more. First is the creational universal consciousness, which is a pure energetic being, a neutral positive entity, which created our universe. The universal consciousness doesn't really direct and look over the human being in the way our religions define the word God. Technically, the word God is kind of an illusionary figure that our religions worship now. And in that sense, Billy often calls God's 10 gods. He says it's a kind of idolatry. In the Om Fallen Mirado, the OM, the Book of Life, or Life's Navel as it is called, it says the gods of the earth were human. They came from the depths of space, from other worlds, and they unrightfully set themselves up above the earth humans, and they created religions, and they claimed to be the creators of the universe. And they committed grievous acts here on the earth, some of them even murders. And eventually they died off, or they left, and now kind of seared into the psyche of human beings on the earth is this notion of God, which is really an illusionary figure. There is a creational universal consciousness. Billy describes it as a neutral positive entity that builds universes as a part of its own evolution. He describes it using the German word Wesenheiten. And a Wesenheiten is a category of beings, actually. And the universal consciousness is a energetic being, much like the Wesenheiten also are water and certain gases. Now, the teaching of the Spirit also talks about the human spirit. And the human spirit sometimes is called a part piece of creation, although it's actually, I think, not directly a part of creation. It's something that creation creates. It's in all of us we have a human spirit. The human spirit is invulnerable. It cannot be damaged by anything in the material realm. Semyase, one of Billy's later contacts, described the human spirit as the seat of the infinite. She also said that the human spirit does not die, and it does not sleep even during our deepest sleep. It records everything that we do, and it will tell us if our thinking is right or wrong. Now, we as human beings have a psyche and a gemut. The gemut is a part of the spiritual body. The gemut controls the thoughts and the feelings associated with our spirit body, or the spiritual consciousness. The psyche controls the thoughts and the feelings associated with our material body. So the two are kind of counterparts of each other. We have a material body and a material existence, and we have a physical body, or a spiritual body as well. And I'm going to get back to this teaching of the Spirit here in a second. I wanted to review a little bit about this concept called the third millennium, because we're going into the third millennium right now. The third millennium is a transition period, and we're starting to see some of the side effects of this tremendous transition period over in the Ukraine with the war. So let me play this clip from these heavy firefights that are occurring near Donetsk, which I think was an area near an airport. So we're seeing conventional warfare here. Ukraine is, I'm almost thinking Ukraine is part of Russia, and I guess they're wanting in their own independence. So let's listen to the sounds of real battles that are going on now, and I want to get back to the teaching of the Spirit, because the teaching of the Spirit is what's going to be allowed, or what's going to help us change our consciousness in a way so we can step outside this useless warfare that continues on this planet over and over again. there's a very real shooting war that's going on over in the Ukraine that involves fighter jets, heavy artillery, machine guns, tanks, bombers, rockets, the whole 9 yards. Billy's first mentor was a man called Svath. He was an extraterrestrial human who taught Billy for about 11 years. One thing he told Billy was that we here on the Earth are entering into the 3rd millennium, and it started when the United States dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we're seeing certain historical trends which are playing out now. Our leaders are becoming megalomaniacal. They're taking away our rights of self-determination. And the people have been indolent, lazy, and they've allowed their rights to be taken away. And in many cases, people are obtuse. And the result is this conflict now because of lack of understanding that we're all connected in various ways. Let's pick back up and listen to some more of these sounds. They're quite incredible. This is what we have to look forward to here on the Earth if we can't get our act together. That horrible sound was the engine of a tank, and then you heard some of the gunfire in the background going on. I spent Friday evening looking through some of these incredible videos on YouTube. I don't know if I recommend that, but you get a realistic feel for what's going on now and the importance of our spiritual growth and the spiritual teaching in the Maya material. Let's pick back up in this clip again. Танчиком запалили, понял? The Henoch Prophecies come from one of the prior predecessor personalities of Edward Albert Meyer. Billy has been Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. We should say his spirit form has. There were at least 3 personalities called Henoch. One was born on the 3rd of February, 9308 BC, and penned the original Henoch Prophecies, which deal with the historical trends that happen roughly within our time. And I'll get back and read a few more of those. I just want to catch the back end of this clip now. Contact 215. Monstrous forces will be created by science and will be released by the military forces and armies as well as terrorists, causing great destruction. Millions and even billions of people will be killed by acts of terrorism, by wars and civil wars, and finally, in some parts of the world, every 3rd human being, and in other places, every 4th human being will lose their life. The nations of the East will rise against the nations of the West against the East. Many deaths will be inflicted upon the people by fighter and bomber aircraft, and bombs and rockets will destroy and annihilate smaller and larger villages and cities. The people will completely be powerless against all this and will live through 888 days of hell on earth, suffering hunger and plagues, which will claim even more lives than the war itself. Now, the Henoch prophecies are prophecies, which means that this doesn't have to happen. In other words, we can turn this around if we continue to grow and learn the teaching of the Spirit. I'll get back to the teaching of the Spirit again here in a second. I want to play a clip of some Ukrainian fighter jets in eastern Ukraine that are flying very low over these soldiers. It's an incredible sound.
Давай, спускайся, красавчик. Вот это сейчас будет прикол!
And don't be fooled. This kind of activity could come to the United States. We have to turn this around. We have to wake up from our sleep. We have to apply ourselves to these principles. However, not only Europe will be affected, by ultimately all the countries and the people of the earth, as the great horror expands to a war that will encompass the entire world. Due to the fault of scientists, enormous power will be seized by the power-hungry and their military. Their wars and terrorists and power will be seized as well through laser weapons of many types, but also via atomic, chemical, and biological weapons. Also concerning this genetic technology, enormous misuse will occur because this will be unrestrainedly exploited for the purposes of war, not lastly due to the cloning of human beings for warring purposes. Now, so at some point we're going to see human clones used for warring purposes if these negative historical trends occur. Now, this cloning of human beings for war was practiced in ancient times with the descendants of Henoch in the regions of the Seir system. I have another insane clip here where a Ukrainian helicopter is shot down. I want to play part of this for you.
As the fighting on the outskirts of town spread, separatists began rushing to their barricades, preparing to defend their positions. The Ukrainian military operation against them was in full swing. The rebels started manning and moving light tanks and armoured personnel carriers they'd captured when they took the city. They'd been expecting a government assault for days. Almost immediately, there were casualties on both sides. In the centre of Saviansk, ambulances hurtled through the streets, past the barricades, crossing bridges, taking the wounded to hospital. Others came in taxis and cars, some insisting on limping into hospital, while medical staff brought more people inside. Civilians have been killed and injured as well, their relatives consoled by friends and family as they were given the news. The Ukrainian military had been taking casualties as well. A helicopter brought 3 hurt soldiers the short distance from the fighting to their camp. The helicopter was later shot down in the city. Loaded with troops, APCs and tanks began positioning reinforcements nearer to the fighting in the south of the city. People trying to reach Slaviansk were stopped at government roadblocks, many choosing to turn round rather than risk the fighting up the road.
Well, the fighting between the government troops and the rebel separatists is happening just a short distance down the road, but local people have been telling us that ordinary civilian cars are being shot at by the separatists as they've tried to leave. It's an indicative, I suppose, of just how tense the situation has become now. And what's very dangerous about this type of battlefield, and it is a battlefield now, is that you're never absolutely certain who's in control. We know the rebels are a short distance down the road. This is a military checkpoint, but the rebels are also that way as well.
The centre of Slaviansk is now very tense. People are helping to strengthen the barricades and checkpoints. The separatist gunmen are preparing for more fighting. The Kiev government says its operation to wrest back the towns and cities that have been taken will continue. More violence in the east is guaranteed. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News in eastern Ukraine.
Well, the eastern Ukraine is where this global war, potentially global war, has started to rear its ugly head. Now, the Meyer material talks much about this concept called the creation, and I want to get to the creation because when you talk about the creation, when you understand what the creation is, you understand what love and wisdom is, and if you study love and wisdom, you start to understand how the world can be brought back to a place of sanity. Billy describes the universal consciousness as a neutral positive spirit that builds universes as a part of its own evolution. In 1975, when Billy's public mission began, he got his first face-to-face contacts with a woman named Semyasi, an extraterrestrial woman of about 340 years old, a very attractive woman, who was studying the laws of nature. And she would literally land her beam ship near Billy's home in Hinterschmidt-Ruti and step out and walk over to Billy, who would often be waiting under a tree. And she would speak in very poetic terms to Billy about the universal consciousness. She would say that love and wisdom go together, and that the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. She said that your ancient philosophers here on earth said that everything in the universe is within a human, that the microcosm is within the macrocosm. And I think what Semyasi was talking about are these repeating patterns in nature. We see the nucleus rotating around, the electron rotating around the nucleus in our own bodies. We see planets rotating around stars. We see the branching in our circulatory system that looks much like the branches of the tree. We see the spiral of the shell, and we see the arms of our galaxy as they spiral. So the universe contains these repeating patterns. And just like here on the Earth, we have flora and fauna and people on other worlds, there are flora and fauna and people. So we see these repeating patterns. Svoth described it this way. He said that everything in the universe is bound together. Everything in the universe is one. Billy has this beautiful work. It's called The Goblet of Truth. And it has this paragraph in it that I quote from all the time. And the paragraph is entitled, What the Truth Knows to Say. And it goes on to explain that rivers, lakes, stones, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time, which involves many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth into the world of pure spirit. And that many creatures in creation are connected by psychic vibrations or swinging waves, and that they're aware of each other. And many of these Weissenheiten communicate with one another, and no creature tries to rise up above creatures of its own kind. Now, if you go into the forest, you can hear the sounds of nature. You can hear the crickets and the cicadas and the peepers and the frogs, and you can hear the birds. Now, I like to say, this is my own idea, I don't know that it's correct entirely, but I like to say the birds sing because they sense the radiating love of creation. Now, if you have become good at observation, and ironically, observation is one of the keys to having real love. Real love is wisdom-conditioned love. It's based on observation. It's based on the recognition that everything in the universe is one, that we're all bound together. There's this German term, it's called Empfinden, which is a fine, sensitive feeling, and I emphasize the importance of going out into nature to take the time to practice this observation, to observe the trees, to listen to the sounds of nature, to reconnect to the oneness of everything. Every tiny plant, every tiny animal in creation fulfills its purpose. It's only man with his consciousness that can close himself off to the radiating love of creation. Now, creation radiates love much like the sun radiates light and heat. It doesn't personally love you and direct your life. You are personally responsible for your life. But an awareness that all of nature responds to the radiating love of creation is the key to start to unlocking our spiritual growth. See, the problem in the third millennium is that people are focused on materialistic intellectual thinking, and they are no longer guided by the Spirit. Remember, Semyasi said that those who are rich in spirit will become an instrument through which the creation can reveal the spiritual realms. Now, when we die, this human spirit will come out of your body, and it will go into a fine matter world or the spiritual realm, where your life experiences will be organized like a mosaic. And at the appropriate time, the universal consciousness will take your spirit and put it back into a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. Also, the wisdom from your predecessor personalities is implanted within the subconscious of the new child. Now, the psyche of the child has to develop again. And as it grows older, the wisdom from those predecessor personalities will inspire that child. They will be impulsed from the storage banks, from the wisdom of their predecessor personalities, and that way, wisdom is built on wisdom. Now, much, much later in our incarnation cycle, millions and millions of years into the future, we will have more and more and more and more recall of our previous personalities and our previous lifetimes. The purpose of our life is to evolve, to gain wisdom. Wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. And when we gather wisdom, we help the whole creation to evolve. The creation uses human spirits as a part of its own evolution. The reincarnational cycle of the human beings plays a role in the evolution of this universal consciousness, which is not perfect. And it's also changeable. It evolves. So it's not what our religions have told us for many, many years. it's a living being, and the universe expands over trillions of years, and it goes through a contraction cycle. If you were to be able to look into the creation, and you would see at the very center this highest, most intense creational energy, and out there are rings which step outward from that with differing kinds of energy. In the fifth layer is what we call the material band, which has the planets and the stars and the galaxies and the physical universe. Well, spiritual energy is coming in from the fourth layer. It eventually manifests in the material for about 45 billion years, and then it leaves the material band and goes back into an energy state. Our scientists are only able to perceive things in the material realm at this point. Semyase explained us as material intellectual thinkers. And that's part of the problem here on the earth, is that we are no longer aware of and paying attention to the deepest intuitions of the human spirit. So we're in a materialistic society, and Spoth warned Billy about materialism. And he told him that in the third millennium that people would be violently opposed to his message, that some would try to kill him. He was told to stay in the background also because the people of the earth create for themselves idols. Even his own wife turned against him, called him a hoaxer. Eventually, Spoth died, and Billy's second contact was a woman named Asket. Asket was from the Tao universe. You see, 46 trillion years ago, our universe was created, along with a parallel universe called the Tao universe. Now, Asket's people are called the Timmers. They reside today in the Tao universe. Billy was told that he would meet Asket when he was 16 years old. He was told to go up on top of a hill and wait for this robotic craft to come down out of the sky, and they would pick him up. And that, in fact, did happen. And this craft landed, and the hatch opened, and Billy walked in, and there was no one else in the craft. So he sat down on a seat. The ship became invisible. He became invisible, and the craft was whisked off to the Middle East. It landed somewhere, and Billy stepped out, walked over to this big red rock. He felt the heat, and he realized he was in Jordan, and it was becoming close to evening at this time. And then out of the sky, he saw what appeared to be a falling star as it came down, got larger and larger, and eventually was a rather large disk there as it slowly floated down to the earth. Billy had to wait about a half an hour, and out stepped this striking woman from the Tao universe called Asket. And Billy asked her, "Why is it that I know you?" And probably at that time, Billy was receiving inspiration from his predecessor personalities. And Asket said, "I can't tell you that. You're going to have to search your own thoughts, your own feelings." She gave him this little device which she put on his belt. And she told him they were going to have to go to the Great Pyramid in Giza. So they both walked back into her ship, and this craft flew to somewhere near the Great Pyramid. They both walked out of the ship, and she touched something on his belt and her belt, and they both became invisible. And Asket explained to him that they were going to go into this secret passage in the Great Pyramid, and they were going to go down these long, long corridors. which were filled with this kind of mysterious pitch black darkness that's sometimes called literally Egyptian darkness. So they traveled a long, long way underground into these cubicle constructions, which were some 72,000 years old, far below the Giza Plateau. And they could eventually got to the point where they could see a small light. So they kept traveling and traveling towards the light. And eventually they entered into this great hallway, where the light seemed to come from every direction, but yet nowhere. And in this hallway was a large ancient spacecraft with guards around it. And Billy noticed what appeared to be a Y-shaped cross, what looked very much like artifacts from the crucifixion of Christ. And he was stunned by all this and trying to put all this together in his mind. And Asket could see that it was time for them to leave, to head back, so she could explain to Billy what they had seen together. So they traveled back this long, dark corridor back up to the surface. And Asket explained to Billy that there were a people on the earth that were called the Giza Intelligences, and their headquarters were far below the Giza Plateau, and that they had used religion to try to control the people of the earth for thousands of years, and that they had appeared as angels and demons and gods since ancient times. And they had a kind of technology which I think is some way related to telepathy. And this technology is called, referred to in the contact notes as telenotic impulses. And she explained that they use these telenotic impulses to influence and control the people of the earth, and that we will be under these telenotic impulses for about another 200 or 300 years. And Billy was just shocked and amazed by all this, and he decided that he would study the religions of the world. And at that point, Asket took him back to Switzerland, and Billy decided that he would travel the world and study the religions of the world. And let's take a short little break on that note, and we'll come back and pick back up with our studies here. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we're looking at the war in Ukraine and the teaching of the Spirit. And on the other side of the break, I'm going to bring in some information that kind of fits with all this. So let's take a short little musical break, and we'll be right back. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I got a reminder from Nate that the peace meditation is today. FIGU has organized this worldwide peace meditation to try to help stabilize the thinking of human beings all over the world and to stave off this potential World War III scenario that we're seeing. I guess the U.S. is becoming involved in the Ukraine, and U.S. fighter bombers now are bombing ISIS artillery. And I think the U.S. may be interested in splitting up Iraq. So let's listen to this clip.
Breaking news this hour. We're just going to remind you the U.S. has carried out airstrikes on artillery belonging to Islamic State fighters near the Iraqi city of Erbil. A Pentagon spokesperson has confirmed this. Media reports suggest hundreds of militants have been killed and wounded in the attack. President Obama has said this would be a last resort only if the jihadists attack the mainly Kurdish area where U.S. personnel are deployed. Let's discuss this now, the latest development, with political analyst William Andol, author of the book Full Spectrum Dominance: Totalitarian Democracy in the New World Order. Mr. Andol, Obama said strikes would only happen if his personnel are in danger. So do you think that this is the only reason that this has now gone through and this has happened?
No, I certainly don't think so. I think the Obama administration is being extremely hypocritical, if not utterly dishonest, about its policy toward Iraq since the emergence of ISIS back in early June as a victorious military force. The ISIS has been supplied with American weapons. Let's ask how that happened so conveniently, almost without a drop of blood being shed. There are reports that ISIS is nothing but a retooling of the Muslim Brotherhood supported all along by the Obama administration in Egypt, in Syria, and elsewhere, and that this is being financed by Qatar, and the Obama administration is quite happy with the ISIS developments. And I think what they're doing now, on the one hand, it's an answer to a humanitarian outcry, including from the Roman Catholic Pope in Rome, to come to the rescue of thousands of Yazidi Christians that are being murdered by the psychopaths of the so-called Islamic State. This is no state at all, but this is a terror operation. And the roots of that go back to the CIA's Mujahideen operation in Afghanistan. You can trace the lineage quite clearly. So I think Obama is lying to the world. He's lying to the American people about what the U.S. military is doing with these surgical airstrikes. Let's see how limited they are. I think the al-Maliki government is out of its mind to invite U.S. military to make airstrikes. There are other militaries that could make such strikes that could be invited instead, but that's another question. So
let me just come back.
We see a world embroiled in conflict, a world that doesn't understand love, doesn't understand our connection to everything. Billy, in one of his writings called Love Teaching Letter number 27, says the love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. The individual should therefore be aware that he exists only through the love of creation, and that he carries this love within himself. All of nature in its indescribable splendor is nothing but the love of creation, which is expressed visibly. Its laws are so wonderfully arranged that people everywhere come up against its radiating love. The universe that we live in is the material manifestation of the wisdom of creation. Wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. When we produce wisdom and its associated energy, we help the whole creation to evolve. And the purpose of our human life is to gain this wisdom. And as Semyase says, love and wisdom belong together because creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. In another quote from Billy Meyer's Law of Love book, reverence, human of earth, is the fundamental element of all existence. So it is therefore also the fundamental element of love itself, which is built on this all-embracing reverence. And since this is so in truth, it is also an impossible thing that love, once awakened and built up in truthfulness, can ever weaken again and become cold or transform into hate. Now, there are two kinds of love. There is a wisdom-conditioned love, which is a harmonious state of absolute connectedness in all things, an indestructible form of love without temporal limits. Genuine love is consistent eternally. It is absolutely independent of the human being's age, their appearance, their personality. However, there is another kind of love that the human being of Earth unfortunately falls into today very much. It's a love that's based more on thoughts and feelings. Billy did this wonderful interview in 2011, and he was asked the question, what is love really? And Billy says, you can quote from what I've written. Love is the absolute certainty that oneself co-lives and coexists in everything that exists, in fauna and flora, in the fellow human being, in each and every material and spiritual life form of every kind, and in the existence of the entire universe and beyond. Therefore, love is not just thoughts and feelings, but true love is a spiritual, fine, sensitive feeling that directly originates from the Gemut, i.e., from the spiritual realm. And what are the human beings on earth usually doing? He says they build a form of thought and feeling related love through their thoughts and feelings, which is often not permanent. They marry, are together, and then even after a few weeks, months, or years, everything falls apart. They divorce, they get into quarrels, they beat each other up, and under certain circumstances, there is even murder and manslaughter or whatever. A feeling-related love, love based on thoughts and feeling, is not what true love is. True love is internally perceived, where things are transferred from the spirit realm in an internally perceived way into the consciousness and the psyche. Now, in this same interview, Billy was asked, is there a heaven? And Billy says, there is a heaven sky as we see it, not the ethereal heaven in that sense. If anyone talks about heaven, the human beings are usually seeing it from a religious angle, i.e., that somewhere an alleged dear God lives or angels, etc., and that heaven, and this heaven does not exist. There is an illusion. This is an illusion. This heaven is based on religion. Angels also are the product of religious assumption. There are no angels in the way that the religions say. In ancient times, the angels were simply called messengers, but the religions came, the faithful people, and they called them angels. But an angel, translated into German and any other languages, means no other thing other than messenger. In an ancient time when certain extraterrestrials still came to the earth, they were called guardian messengers. Guardian and messenger at the same time. Guardian angels do not exist. This is also an invention by the religions and the sects. Each guardian angel that exists is the human being himself, through his thoughts, through his feelings, through his consciousness, or simply his mental block, respectively. That's why he decides, through his reason and understanding, that he shall do in a correct way. And if certain things occur, then he thinks like lightning without noticing. When he still thinks unconsciously, when he triggers feelings unconsciously and makes everything right, then he protects himself. So we protect ourselves through our own thinking. There is no such thing as an external guardian angel as religion and sects claim. It does not exist. The human being is his own guardian angel. Billy was asked, can a human being have two spirit forms? Billy says no. This is absolutely impossible. Only one spirit form can be in an individual human being. And if some other things occur, then it is a disorder of the consciousness which brings forth these different personalities. You can even see 5, 6, 20, or 30 personalities, but this is purely a matter of consciousness for each single human being, whereas no other spirit form can be in a body. What we see is schizophrenia, the split of the personality. It is impossible that two spirit forms can simultaneously exist in the human being. This is possible only if there are Siamese twins, where there are two heads and two bodies, or even three heads. There you have the spirit form in each head. Each brain has its own spirit form and not more. And everything else appears as the nonsense example that comes from Catholicism, where incantations are performed and exorcisms. All of this is plain nonsense. There is no evil spirits which exist anyway. Billy says that each spirit is absolutely neutral. Therefore, no spirit form can be in a human being except his own. There is no devil who can take hold of the human being. There is no dear God who can take hold of the human being. The human being has his own consciousness, his own thoughts, his own feelings, and he lives and works with them. And what concerns the casting out of devils, exorcism, and the like, this is pure nonsense, simply because there is no other spirit form in the human being except for his own. Now, those of us who studied the Maya material will find this very refreshing. I do. I think that there is a kind of thinking that has permeated our religion that's kind of enslaved the consciousness of human beings here on the earth. I want to play just a few clips related to the fires and the drought that is occurring in Washington State. We're running out of time. The greatest fire in human history, the greatest fire in the state of Washington in its history, the greatest fire ever in the state of Washington, has recently burnt in what they're calling the Carlton Complex. Now, because of the incorrect thinking of human beings on Earth and our incorrect behaviors in so many areas, including overpopulation, we have caused a great imbalance all over our planet. And this imbalance is like a Pandora's box that's manifesting in fires, in storms, in warfare, and it's all related to the incorrect thinking of here, our incorrect thinking on the earth. And we here, we the earth human, are responsible for many, many, many of the problems that are taking place on our planet. Now let's listen to this wildfire that's going on now.
Tonight, hot, dry winds are fanning wildfires in 6 western states. Hundreds of families have been forced from their homes, and some have no home to go back to. Carter Evans reports Washington is among the hardest hit.
Smoke rose 25,000 feet over the largest fires burning in Washington state. The fire that's destroyed 100 homes in Potreros has scorched more than 168,000 acres. Josh Allen was turned away at a roadblock.
Probably the hardest thing I've had to do. Knowing that your house is burning up.
This fire on the eastern slopes of the Cascade Mountains produced a wall of flames that moved in on the town of Leavenworth. 900 homes have been evacuated, including Tim Germain's.
It really looked like, the cauldron of hell. You can see flames everywhere you looked. With this kind of heat and wind, it looks like eastern Washington is going to burn to the ground.
Across the country, 12 states are experiencing severe to extreme drought conditions. At U.S. Forest Service headquarters in Los Angeles, they're juggling assets to cover areas at risk. But Forest Supervisor Thomas Contreras says that causes other problems.
How does that impact you down here? Well, it impacts me because now I have a hole where we've moved our assets up there, and again, we want to provide the protection that's necessary here. We will get resources from other parts of the United States to fill in our gaps.
The last time this part of the Angeles National Forest got any rain was back in February. And Scott, it was barely measurable.
Carter, thanks very much.
I also want to talk about the drought briefly here that's going on in California, where people can't flush their toilet, they can't take showers. Again, all of this chaos is related to the third millennium, related to our thinking, related to our behavior, related to our overpopulation.
Where I'm standing is a powerful symbol of California's crippling drought. This is Lake Mendocino in Northern California, and it's pretty much dried up. Normally you'd see people out in the water using their boats, but right now it's just pretty much a desert. The lack of rain has pushed nearly 80% of the state into either extreme or exceptional drought categories. Those are the highest levels. And most of the major reservoirs, the water that sustains so many communities throughout the state, those are less than half full. It's so dry that thieves are actually stealing water. A father and daughter living off a water tank in the Central Valley say they've been ripped off 8 times.
It's horrible. We go without showering. We can't flush our toilets, can't wash our hands.
At Hearst Castle, a popular attraction for tourists, they had to drain the reflective Neptune pool early. The sparkling blue water has given way to a skateboarder's fantasy. The drought also having an impact on food prices. Meat and produce rising as much as 6% according to the USDA. Fast food chains like Chipotle and In-N-Out Burger have raised their prices. We're also seeing a new phenomenon with so-called drought busters, people combing through communities looking for water wasters, leaky sprinklers, things of that nature. And public parks, some cities are no longer watering the grass, and you can see brown patches in places like Santa Barbara along the waterfront. It's been a very long summer, and there's just no end in sight for this drought.
The firefighters in California are on the front lines of climate change.
The fire season, not just expensive, but historic. Nationwide so far this year, more than 32,000 wildfires have burned. 1.6 million acres charred, most of them in the West. Feeding the fires, drought crippling 60% of the West, intensifying across the region, creating what's called mega fires, burning faster, hotter, and more explosive than ever before. Crews call this the front lines of climate change, a longer, more destructive fire season.
Well, folks, I'll be back at 8 p.m. Eastern this evening on Revolution Radio. That's at freedomslips.com and Studio B. And we'll be back on Blog Talk Radio Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. I hope you enjoyed the show this afternoon. I hope it's reminded you of some things, and maybe even you've learned a couple new things as well. There's a lot of information with the Meyer material, a lot of things that we can learn, and I'm always enjoying sharing this information with you. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Let me play just a little bit of this clip called The Overpopulation Crusade, and then we'll end the show here in about 2 or 3 minutes.
An extensive and threatening topic nobody dares to address. Planet Earth and its inhabitants are suffering from diverse ills caused singularly and exclusively by man himself. These already existing ills, however, will continue to proliferate until finally everything completely deteriorates. The Earth's population is plagued by famines, energy shortages, epidemics, environmental pollution, degeneration, terrorism, dictatorship, anarchism, slavery, excessive increase of waste materials, racial hatred, food shortages, destruction of rainforests, the greenhouse effect, pollution of lakes, streams and oceans, hatred towards asylum seekers, radioactive emissions, chemical pollution of water, air, plants, food, human beings and animals, crime, murder, mass murders, manslaughter, alcoholism, hatred of strangers, oppression, hatred of one's fellow man, extremism, sectarianism, drug addiction, overpopulation, annihilation of animal species, war, violence, torture and capital punishment, general mismanagement, water contamination, eradication of plant species, hatred, vice, jealousy, lovelessness, lack of logic, false humanitarianism, lack of housing, increased traffic, destruction of arable land, unemployment, the collapse of healthcare, the collapse of care for the elderly, destruction of nature, the collapse of solid waste removal, and the lack of living space, among others. In spite of the many efforts, mankind's problems are not decreasing but, instead, continue to rise steadily in direct proportion to population increases. Mankind on Earth has always tried to fight an old ill with a new one, but, truthfully, this path is leading to man's final destruction. The scenario may be compared to a debt that grows immeasurably to the point where it can no longer even be paid, as is the case when an individual goes into debt and attempts to pay it off by going further into debt, only to furnish security for the...
We'll be back at 8 p.m. this evening. Thanks for listening, folks.